This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 452, Starshot and Experience Builder. On today's show, we are talking about Drupal Starshot, Experience Builder, and the future of Drupal with our guests, Matthew Grasmick and Lauri Escola. We'll also cover default content as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guests here are Matthew Grasmick and Lauri Escola. Matthew leads Acquia's CMS strategy, collaborating across teams to shape Acquia's product vision for Drupal Cloud. He's a longtime Acquian since 2012 and Drupalist since 2009, having led products to market including Acquia CLI, Cloud IE, Code Studio, Migrate Accelerate, Lightning Pipelines, Node.js, and Cloud Actions. He's also led Acquia's Drupal acceleration team to contribute heavily to Drupal 9 and 10 major releases, Project Browser, automatic updates, layout builder, media workflow, JSON API, and more. Lauri works in Acquia's Drupal acceleration team as one of the product managers for Drupal core. He has been actively contributing to Drupal since 2013, has been a core committer since 2017. He has contributed to Drupal 8, Umami Demo, Claro, CKeditor 5, single directory components, and much more. Matthew and Lauri, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And actually, I just want to mention that I was looking up the product managers 10 minutes before the show because I just tagged an issue as needing product manager review. And so I saw that you were one of them. So thank you for that.
So I guess I know what is looking for me in my RSS feed then.
Yeah, there's I saw a comment about the RSS feed for issues the other day. I'm going to have to see if I can set that up because it seems like a nice way to manage, kind of what you're dealing with in Drupal. Because as I've become more active in the core queue, it gets it can get quite noisy. So I'll have to look into that.
You can connect that to Slack. So there's a Slack channel that ingests the RSS feed. I find that's the best way to actually see it.
Interesting. I'll have to look into that. I'm Nick Laffin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-host is John Picozzi, Solution Architect at EPAM.
Hello, and for anybody watching the video, I love Drupal.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to have your modules create content when they're installed? There's a module for that. It's called Default Content, and it was created in October of 2015 by prolific contributor Lee Rowlands, who goes by Laralan, though the most recent releases are by Sasha Grossenbacher, who goes by Berdir, also a maintainer of many popular Drupal modules. Now, the version available is 2.0.0 Alpha 2, which works with Drupal 9 and 10. Does have a security coverage, it's opted into security coverage, but needs a stable release before it will actually be covered by the security team. It also has test coverage and documentation, and there are 105 open issues, 29 of which are bugs against the current branch, which is pretty good considering that the module is in use by almost 20,000 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, the module provides a way for other modules to include default content in the same way that many modules already include default configuration. The module exports content as YAML files, and your module can specify the content that should be exported by listing the UUIDs in the info.yaml file. It also provides a number of drush commands to export a single entity, to export an entity and all of its dependencies, or to bulk export all of the content referenced in a module's info.yaml file. There is also a companion project to export default content using an action within a view, which also makes me think it could probably be automated with something like ECA if you needed that. Exported content should be kept in a content directory within your module, where it will be imported during install on any site that has the default content module installed. I thought this would be a good module to cover today because Drupal core's recipe system also includes support for default content. So when you install a recipe, it will similarly import any YAML encoded content in the recipe. In fact, I used this module for the first time exporting taxonomy terms. I wanted a recipe to create as default values for a taxonomy that it creates. Since recipes will be a big part of Starshot, I expect default content to be getting a lot of use in the coming months. So let's talk about default content.
So just out of curiosity on the last point that you raised there, if you were to use a recipe, right, that then used default content, and then you were to uninstall default content, the default content, I'm assuming, stays after it's been added to the site, right? It's not like it's dependent on the module, right? Interesting. Okay. That's pretty cool.
And actually, just to clarify that on that point, John, you actually don't even need the default content module installed when you install the recipe for it to ingest that content or for it to create the content. That's actually built into the core recipe system.
So where does the core recipe default content capability stop and this module start? I don't really understand where the overlap is, or why I would use a module if I can just use something in core.
So there's really two answers for that. So number one is with this module, you can have default content in your module as opposed to a recipe. And also this module can be used as a simple way to generate those YAML files from your content, as opposed to sort of, manually creating those.
So
interesting.
It's like tools for extending and using what's in core.
Exactly.
That sounds great.
You mentioned that you used it to create some taxonomies, but does it, I wonder, I think the answer is no, to be clear, but I wonder if this helps with the situation that you occasionally run into when you're trying to set like defaults for taxonomy terms. Because if you kind of have to do a two-step process where you create the taxonomy on a higher environment, pull that to your local, then set the default. Otherwise, UIDs don't always line up. Does this allow you to know what the UID is for a particular taxonomy term, even if the actual TID changes or something, or do you still kind of have to do that shuffle to set defaults?
So default content, I would say, works entirely based on UUIDs. So even when you're telling the module in your info.yaml which content you want it to create those YAML files for, all of that is done by specifying the UUID. So I would definitely expect it to be able to have a predictable UUID for things like entity references, as long as it doesn't have to be sort of based on something that can change between environments like an NID or a TID.
Okay. That might be another really nice use case, because whenever you set up like a filter in views or something based on taxonomy IDs, sometimes that haven't been for vocabularies that haven't been created yet, things get a little weird, and it sounds like this might help with that. I'll have to test that next time I need that. Thanks, Martin. I still don't quite know how you find such on-topic modules week after week. But if folks want to suggest modules of the week, what's the best way for them to do that?
We're always happy to get nominations for module of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal and social channels.
Awesome. Now on to our primary topic this week. Okay, so this is, I'm very excited for this episode. Listeners may know this, but John plans the show and topics out usually 6 to 8 weeks in advance. But it just so happens that the guest host this cycle is closely involved with Starshot, and Starshot was just announced. So can you tell us, Matthew, what's the elevator pitch for Drupal Starshot?
Yes, I can. This is going to be fun. I think I should start with what the actual mission statement is, which was carefully drafted and reviewed with core committers, and every word kind of is planned in it. So I want to read that out and then talk about it a bit. This was in the Dries note, but it's that Starshot's a fast-moving open source product that enables site builders without Drupal experience to easily create a new Drupal site and extend it with pre-packaged recipes, all using only their browser. And unlike Drupal core or Drupal framework, whatever we decide to call that, it guides site builders to install recipes for common use cases and innovative capabilities that are immediately useful for production. We will know it's successful if it gets people to install, or from install to launching really fast, and brings people and contributors into Drupal and the open web. So that's kind of the pitch. And like I can maybe like go before the pitch and talk about how we got to the pitch. And when I say we, I should also say I work really closely with Larry. You know, we mentioned he's on the Drupal acceleration team. We work very closely with Dries, and Dries has been working very closely with all of the core committers and kind of iteratively bringing the strategy to the point where he could present it in the Dries note. So that's the kind of we. But when we started the strategic process, one of the first things we tried to do is be really honest about where we think Drupal is today. You know, do we think if there's two extremes, one is like it's growing and it's the cool new thing and it's taken off like a rocket ship, pun intended, or it's dying and we're just, you know, on its last legs waiting for it to slowly extinguish itself. And a lot of people pretty unanimously felt that we have a problem, that we are declining in some sense. And so there is urgency that we need to do something to resolve that. And then we looked at, you know, what do we think the most important persona is and the most important problem to solve for them? And as Dries has said in previous Dries notes, like the ambitious site builder is really the target persona. And for me, like I'll give you the argument that I gave him and I like to give everyone, which is when I started with Drupal in like 2008, I was making websites top to bottom, and I was researching what should I learn. I didn't know Drupal, I didn't know WordPress, and I found Drupal, I found WordPress. I tried them both out, and when I tried Drupal, I found that as a inexperienced developer, I could make some really cool stuff really quickly that I couldn't make in anything else, and I could do it without writing code, and I felt powerful. You know, I felt like a wizard, like, oh my gosh, I can actually deliver this stuff other people can't deliver to big customers that, you know, and I'm not going to fail. I've got some confidence. And I think that's pulled me to Drupal. I fell in love with it. I started, you know, writing modules and contributing. And today, I don't think I could have that experience again. I think if I downloaded it, I would struggle and be disempowered and give up and choose something else, unless my employer told me I couldn't, you know? And so, I mean, that's one angle. That's the community angle, which is really critical to fix. But there's also like the end user, like a content creator, has the same problem. They get lost in Drupal really quickly. You know, they have trouble just getting the basics done, even a developer. So that's kind of, we know there's an urgent problem. Our primary persona is disempowered, and we need to solve it. And so Starshot is one of the solutions. Experience Builder is also part of this, and Starshot includes it. Sorry, I'm running long here, but you know, Starshot is really about kind of getting back to what made Drupal great. It's like getting back to reclaiming our mantle of being able to just be a site builder and download something and get really far before you have to learn to code and dig deep into the docs and the APIs. So it's an accelerator and it's a way to empower. And so that's why some critical parts are like, don't make someone use the command line, right? We remember, probably all of us, the hesitancy the community had towards our composer dependency, and it's still there, right? Don't make people leave the browser, because the second you're not in the browser, you need to know Git, right? And that's a huge hurdle. Before, I just used FTP. I could do that as a site builder, right? That's not even a thing anymore. So as soon as I leave the browser, I'm kind of screwed if I'm not a developer. So that's kind of the heart of the problem we're fixing. So I'll stop there.
I don't want to interrupt too much, because this feels like my story. I'm having nostalgia as you're describing this. Like I personally will not go back to those days, because now I'm a different type of developer. But like you, I think starting Drupal today would be a much steeper climb for me. You know, I started too as I wasn't a developer. And I remember, you know, one of my first level up experiences in building sites was like, I would build a site locally open up FTP, copy everything, and then walk away for 4 hours because copying of views took 3 hours because there were 4,000 files, right? And then I learned that you could zip things up, upload them,
Yeah.
SSH in and extract it there. And oh my God, now I can do it in 5 minutes. And then I learned Drush, and then I learned Git, and then I learned, so that kind of, it's kind of interesting. I don't want to tag on too much to this answer, but I think part of it too is building the pipeline again for not just customers but for developers to get in. Like I said, I consider myself a strong developer now and a strong Drupal developer now, but when I started, I wasn't. I mean, it took me 5 websites before I even wrote my first line of code, and it was very much just finding something on Drupal.org and copying and pasting it and changing a couple of values, like script kiddie stuff. But again, if I had to start from, compose, like there's just so much that I added on over years that it was very, very difficult to do nowadays.
Yeah.
Anyway, like I said, I got. Go ahead.
I think this is the story of a lot of us in the Drupal community. I've talked to a lot of people in the community, and I've heard the story repeatedly that this is how they got started with Drupal. They learned more technical things gradually with Drupal. They kind of grew into a developer with Drupal. And then as that happened with within the community, Drupal also became more technical and more geared towards someone who is more technical. And we kind of then lost the pipeline that you mentioned, that it's really hard for someone new to get started, which really was the reason for people to pick Drupal in the first place. Back in the day when we were growing rapidly.
As a metaphor, like we crossed this chasm on a bridge and then we like burned the bridge behind us. It's kind of what happened. We all got over it, but we're not getting new members in the community. I just want to point out also, for anyone who wasn't at DrupalCon, Dries went through this thing in the Dries note where he's like, stand up and then sit down if you've been with Drupal, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, et cetera, just to see the tenure of the audience. And such a high percent of the audience, like I think 80% or more was a decade plus. And
wow.
While on one hand that's kind of cool, like wow, we have something powerful, we have something that binds us together, this community really matters, it's also kind of scary and sad because it means we're not bringing new people in. And I think this is one of the main reasons.
Ease of use is definitely a gateway to new users, right? So like you think of the solutions that are out there. We're going to talk more about this in detail, I think, but you think of some of those site building solutions and how easy they are to use, and exactly what you said, Matthew. Like you don't gotta get on the command line. You don't have to know Git. All you do is you're in your browser. You're building your website, right? I do agree that is a great gateway into Drupal if we can make it, right. And part of, admittedly, I'm in the process of working on a blog post about this, but admittedly, when Starshot was announced at DrupalCon, I was kind of like, oh boy, here we go again. Like wasn't really drinking the Kool-Aid, had some like serious concerns about it. Since then I've had conversations with you, Matthew, and others, and I've kind of come around to the possibility and the idea. And I think it's important. And I think it's going to be a great step forward. But like, there was a DrupalCon 2 years ago, maybe, where Dries kind of introduced the idea of ambitious site builders, right? And like, to me, that really spoke to me as a person that like admittedly says to everybody, I would not subject anybody to my code, right? I'm not overly comfortable writing code. I can do it if need be, but like don't really want to. And I feel like Drupal kind of started out as you guys said, like it started out as like very, very developer focused, right? I think like, we kicked off that idea of ambitious site builders, but I don't know that we ever fully followed through on it.
Yeah.
Right. And like, this feels like an evolution of that where we now are going to say like, no, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build a version of Drupal using recipes, using all of the great tools that come in Drupal core, or that soon will come in Drupal core. Right.
Yeah.
And we're going to provide a solution that allows for people to just build sites without having to know all of this extra stuff. And I think you're right. I think it's definitely going to bring in new community members and reinvigorate innovation, right? Because new ideas, new people bring that innovation.
And you know what you just mentioned a few years ago, yeah, Dries announced that, and it didn't come to fruition really. Like, really, when he announced that, we started a lot of hard things in parallel at that moment. Like, we started automatic updates, we started layout builder, we started at some point soon after project builder browser. And so we actually started back then, and it's all part of the same strategic direction. And a difference now is this stuff's like all coming together. It's culminating. We're finishing it, and it's actually realizing the vision that's been the vision, not just since that Dries note, but actually from the beginning of Drupal. And you know, Dries had a slide in the Dries note that showed like him super young, standing up, giving a presentation. There's a slide in the back, and I think they blurred out what the slide was that was on the wall. But what it said something like, let people create a content model with fewer clicks. Like, and that was like, version 4 that he's up there presenting. And even back then, it was about the site builder having an easier time in the browser to get their job done.
Yeah, and I think these descriptions really helped align the urgency for me, because people have been making steady progress in all these things. I feel like Drupal 8 was like a line in the sand for the Drupal community. I mean, it's undeniable. It's that bridge that you mentioned earlier, Matthew. And it forced us to spend the next few years working more on the developer experience again, getting a lot of things like config management fully nailed down, getting Composer really worked out as a community. Like, there were a lot of really important things. Yeah. And then I think the community, because now we're such strong developers, things moved a little bit slower on the site builder experience side. And it feels to me like Starshot is just like, okay, we just need, like, new stuff is going to come out of that. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But from a semi-outsider of that piece, it looks like it's really just like taking all the initiatives we've been working on for the last 4 years, finishing them up, and putting them in a really easy to use package.
Yeah.
I think a part of it is also making site building cool again, in the sense that I think there's been this sentiment for some time where doing things through the UI with the site building way is not the right way. Developers keep telling site builders that they need to learn the developer way of doing something, instead of styling your entity displays through the field UI. They're telling to use the templates or PHP to define how entities are being displayed. And what we're now trying to do is, like I said, make that the site building the right way to do things, and then provide right mechanisms for a developer to enhance those site building capabilities instead of having to rewrite everything in code.
So I think Matthew alluded to this when he was telling us about Starshot. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what is being called Experience Builder, right? That's essentially what you're talking about. So what is Experience Builder?
So Experience Builder is a Drupal module, which will enable site builders without Drupal experience to easily and without any Drupal knowledge to team and build their entire website using their browser. It will enable content creators to compose content on any part of the page without relying on developers. And it will be built in a way that complements Drupal's existing strong points, such as using content across multiple channels or managing content at large scale. And all of this is enabled by the structured data and the content modeling capabilities that we have in Drupal. So instead of building a tool that is similar to what you can see in something like Wix or Squarespace, where everything is unstructured and you have to manage everything individually, it's still going to be built the same way as things work in Drupal. We're just going to make it much easier than what it's today. And then you can still get the same benefits as what you get with Drupal today.
Very cool. That's
Looking forward to it.
exciting, because I feel like, going back to what Matthew was saying about like his introduction into Drupal, right? It was like, oh, I installed it and I built a website and it was great and I could do it easily, right? I feel like we've evolved the Drupal core and the way we do things and the technology behind it, right? To be this great system that's, scalable and extensible and all of these great things, right? Now, like adding this layer on top of like, hey, now you can actually come into here and build structured content, and then not only just build it, but also like build pages and be able to do all of this interesting stuff through Experience Builder is really, really interesting to me. It feels very exciting.
Yeah, an Experience Builder is key part for us to being able to realize that vision on Starshot. So we're seeing those as two different initiatives today because they are both big chunks of work. So we're tracking them as their own initiatives,
right?
But they are still both heading towards that same vision. Starshot, in order for it to be successful, needs Experience Builder initiative to be successful as well. So even though we're talking about them as separate talking points, they are still very much connected.
It's kind of the Drupal way of doing things, right? Break things down into like small manageable pieces that can be kind of added into core or available to the community to come together to power this great system.
It's modular, and Starshot's modular.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, with the modules of the lunar module, etc. Yeah, but Experience Builder, I think of it as the most important module in Starshot, and I just want to add, you made me think, John, when you were talking about the strengths of Drupal. Like I just want to go back and say, like, Drupal's got plenty of problems, and we started with that. We started with, let's acknowledge the problems and there's an urgency to fix them. But I really like the metaphor that was in the Dries note that there's this huge engine and it's sitting there idle and it's kind of locked behind these controls where you need to be an expert to use it. And I wouldn't be here and energized and putting so much effort in if I didn't think there was something there in Drupal that gives us an opportunity to make something better than everything else. But there's something unique. There's something uniquely valuable. And you kind of, we're all mentioning with like structured data. And in the long version of the Experience Builder mission statement that we drafted, so it's kind of continuing what Larry was just saying. We gave some examples of what we think Drupal will be able to do better than anything else because it leverages Drupal's strengths in the Experience Builder. And those things include like managing and reusing content across channels and across context. So both coupled web, headless web, mobile, data feeds, RSS, but also context like a card display, a table row, a slideshow slide, because we have fine-grained access controls and a content model. And it also makes things easier for the large-scale content operations, like I need to do a rebrand, or I need to do an import or an export or a migration. Yeah. These are things that are really, really hard to do with Gutenberg or Wix or Squarespace. You can't scale in that way. You can't reuse in that way. So this, we will have unique value in the Experience Builder, and we will have it because of what Drupal does uniquely well. It's really hard stuff to do. But, WordPress isn't going to fix the structured data and access problem quickly, even if they have a nice front end on Gutenberg. Yeah. So this is where our opportunity is.
Yeah, and design consistency and data consistency sounds very enterprise or large scale, but it doesn't have to be large scale. I think the smallest size for an organization could be just 2 people, where one person builds the site and you want someone else to be able to update your site without having to worry about breaking the design. Yeah. And this is something that I hear consistently when I talk to people in the field of marketing, where they are extremely frustrated by the fact that they can't provide their colleagues access to the system in order to update the year in the footer or update the year of the event.
I just want to mention that I just got a text message during this show from someone that I'm a partner with. We have a website. There's two of us. So exactly what you're talking about, Larry. It's a Drupal site. I built it, and he's trying to change the content right now. And he texts me. He's like, "How do I change this button on this page?" And like, you can't. The answer is like, it's in a Twig template. I'm sorry. Like, I tried to build the site so that anything can be edited. You can hover over and you can change the block, but it's so hard in Drupal. You have to like really go against the grain and try to make a system that enables site builders in your custom Drupal application to make it possible. So it just happened. And
Yeah.
I'll give a counter example. It's not perfect, but I just think this is a cool story. My father-in-law, I built a Drupal site for him in Drupal 7 like a decade ago. And a few weeks ago, he texted me. He's like, "The site's down." And I looked like, "Oh God, I don't even remember how this site works." And it was because the hosting provider dropped support for PHP like 7.2. It was like still running 7.2 on an early version of Drupal 7. And so I was like, "Wait, how do I FTP again?" And I found the credentials. I FTP'd in. And I uploaded a new version of Drupal 7. And then I logged into the database updates page, looked to the database updates page, pressed the button, and it updated over 100 versions of Drupal. It jumped over 100 versions, did everything in the browser, and everything worked. Just like that. And there's no composer, there's no custom code. Everything was just like some FTP in the browser. And it was really fast. And when I did have to do some custom code, I went to ChatGPT and just dropped the whole module in it, and it just upgraded it to PHP 8.2. So like it was like an hour, a site I hadn't seen in a decade, upgrading it over 100 versions, all in the browser. And that moment, I was like, "Oh, this is what was so cool about Drupal." Like that felt like I just did something really hard so easily, and I don't have that anymore. So I just thought that's like a perfect moment of like, it was like nostalgic for me.
And to be clear, I think one of the nice things about Drupal right now is even if somebody starts, aside from the fact that I know automatic updates and project browser are using Composer under the hood to make it easier, but even if they weren't, because Drupal has such strong support for Composer, when those sites need to move to an agency because now the needs are too complex and they need some help, I suspect converting a site built using the site builder methodology with the Starshot and Experience Builder system, converting that to a CI/CD pipeline using Composer, using best practices, isn't going to be impossible. I've tried converting non-Drupal projects to. I've converted Drupal 9 sites that don't use Composer to use Composer. It's a few hours of work usually. Converting a non-Composer WordPress site to Composer, oh boy.
Right.
Yes,
that's a task.
That is part of the philosophy of building a platform where both site builders and developers can work together. You have to make sure that all of the tasks that your site builders might be taking don't lead into a dead end, in the sense that a developer couldn't build on top of that. So that's something we need to take into account both on the Starshot and Experience Builder. So for example, if a site builder started creating a component using the Experience Builder and they started theming that using their browser, there needs to be a way for a developer to start building on top of that via code eventually. Because otherwise the developers just keep telling the site builder that don't use the UI because of it's a dead end. And then everyone needs to learn development again.
It's like that communication layer between the browser and the underlying Twig templates, right? Whether the browser is and I'm oversimplifying here, but whether the browser is just creating Twig templates in the background, right? That then a developer could go and edit, or however that works. It's just building that communication layer to say like, hey, okay, you did it in the browser, that's fine, but now a developer could take it even further if they wanted to, right?
Yeah. So, and part of it could be that you need to run a command as a developer to say like, drush export components, and then you get all of the components in your code base. It could be something like that, because then you have a developer, you can expect them to know how to run a command like that. So you can imagine a similar way to interacting with as what you can do with the configuration system today.
It's super interesting that you bring that up, because as Martin was talking about the module of the week, and you just mentioned it now, like the config system, for me at least, as a again, a site builder, more on the site builder side, was like a huge, like, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. I loved the config system when it came out, because it was like, oh, it's super easy. You export config, and then you do your, you do your PR and you import config, and then like, woo, everything just works, right? Like, to be able to do that with content, or to be able to do that with a theme, it would it's next level, right? It brings it to like it's exactly what I was just talking about, that communication between like the site builder side of things and then the developer side of things.
Yeah. So we're 2 questions in and 35 minutes into the show. So let's get to some of.
Man, are we talking Drupal or what?
Yeah, this is great. So my next question is, how will Starshot build on and improve Drupal core? Because it's not a distribution, it's not a profile, it's not a module. It's less. It feels more ambitious than most initiatives, because it's almost like an epic initiative or super initiative. Like, what's the plan for improving core with this, or improving the Drupal experience?
So there's a few ways to answer that. One is, there's already a bunch of stuff going into Drupal core that we need for Starshot, and that's part of why it's going into Drupal core, like automatic updates, recipes, project browser. So like, it's already getting that benefit. But we have it kind of doesn't matter. And like, that's kind of a controversial thing to say, but from the end user standpoint, they don't, like a site builder, they don't care if something's in core. They don't even know what that means. And like, nobody, 0 people launch a website with just Drupal core. You always download a module, right? So like, it doesn't really matter what's exactly in Drupal core. What matters is that the end user is getting the value that they need, and that we can get it to them quickly. And so, yes, we should move things into core for reasons of stability and backwards compatibility and meeting our standards eventually, but it's far more important that we get what people need to them sooner. And so it's not the priority, is what I'm kind of getting at. Is the priority is to find a way to deliver these capabilities, which frankly are already, many of them, stable and useful and accessible. They already meet so many of these guidelines, even though they're not in core. And it would take us years to get them into core. So what I imagine is, we'll follow 2 patterns. Like, we'll continue this pattern of introducing APIs into core that get leveraged by Starshot. And the second is, if we get something in Starshot and it's like so obviously great and belongs in Drupal core, like, it kind of gets ported over.
Okay.
But the idea there, right? And I want to be very clear, because I think, some people out there may think that like Starshot is a different version of Drupal, and that is definitely not the case, right?
Right.
Like, and I don't want to oversimplify what's being done, but like, in my mind, and Matthew, you can correct me where I'm wrong here, but like, in my mind, Starshot is essentially a recipe, right, for Drupal that is going to install Drupal core, contributed modules that are needed for it to run. Mm-hmm. And maybe some of those are like custom built modules specifically for Starshot, right? But they're still in the, the contrib ecosystem. And then based on that, right, some of those things may get added to core, maybe down the road, maybe more frequently, right? So like, that's the correct understanding, right?
That's right. Yeah, you should think of it not as an alternative to Drupal. Like, it's a layer on top of it, and Drupal's still right under it. And you can make that layer as thick or thin as you want. And really, there's 2 important things about Starshot in this context. One is, yes, it's a recipe, so it's just going to add some stuff. But another is, it's a recipe that lets you add more recipes. So the really critical part is that it's going to give you a user interface where you decide what layers you put on top. And, for some of you may know, if you're familiar with project browser, that it's the projects are Drupal.org projects, but they are not limited to Drupal.org projects. So if you're an agency and you have your own recipes on your private recipe server, and you want to make that available to your customers, you can, or an organization, or you're just an end user. You're a company that has a Drupal site and you want people to make 10 of them because you're a university and you just want your university's recipes. Like, you can do that too. So it's kind of a distribution mechanism for capabilities. And in that sense, it's trying to accomplish what distributions tried to accomplish: installation profiles, features in Drupal 7, even to a degree, configuration management in Drupal 8+. It's just trying to create a distribution mechanism. But one of the critical differences about this distribution mechanism is that you can stay in your browser. That's the big one.
Well,
I think the other
and sorry, and as a developer, you're not as locked in. Like, as a developer,
Yes.
distributions kind of went away in Drupal 8. Like, you just got too locked into something. And the same thing for profiles. Like, if you don't use the standard profile for Drupal, some random things break. Like, yes, the minimal will work, but I've run into issues where certain things just can't be installed if you're on the minimal profile. Like, weird things just go awry. Drupal doesn't really expect a site to not be on the standard profile.
Yeah.
And I think this helps kind of solve, hopefully, those two problems.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Nick. And it's exactly what I was going to bring up is like, I don't want to say distributions and profiles are a thing of the past, but I think that they are changing, into recipes, and recipes are, best practices or suggestions, right? Or a starting point, if you will. And, the way I look at Starshot is like, this is a springboard, right? So there's going to be a good amount of stuff that you can do with Starshot, right? Through Experience Builder, through the modules that get added with that recipe, right? But then there's an opportunity there, going back to like the beginning of the show where we're talking about community growth, right? That you get started with Starshot and like you take it as far as you can, and then you're like, okay, well, we need to get a development team involved here because there's more custom stuff that we want to do, or we want to take it further, right? And then you have the ability to go ahead and do that because you're using a recipe that isn't a distribution, that isn't locking you in, that isn't overly opinionated.
Yeah, you
right?
can change whatever you want after that and kind of maintain things manually. Shifting gears back to Experience Builder for a second, do you think the plan is for that to get into core itself? I know Matthew mentioned that certain pieces of Starshot will get into core. Do you think Experience Builder is one of those?
So we haven't defined the specific heuristics for what goes into Starshot and what goes into Drupal core. So all of this is kind of speculation at this point. Yeah. But I would imagine that Drupal core will focus on what it does the best, like sort of what differentiates from other CMSs, which is foundational capabilities that contributor modules can build on top of. Yeah. And whether we define that Experience Builder is part of that or not is something that we will see in future. I would imagine that there's lots of pieces like subsystems of Experience Builder that will go into Drupal core because we want those to be foundational capabilities. One of the examples of that is the component system. So we are planning to use single directory components for the Experience Builder. And all of the improvements that we need to make for the components ideally will go into the single directory components so that the single directory components that you use to interact with the Experience Builder are the same single directory components that you would use on any other Drupal site that is not using Experience Builder.
Makes sense.
But then there could be parts like the UI-based team building, which I wouldn't necessarily say is the foundational capability that all of the contrib is going to build on top of. And it might be that something like that never goes into Drupal core because of that.
Makes sense.
But all of that still defines the specific heuristics that we define, sort of what constitutes that foundational capability.
Makes sense.
So I have a listener question, and worth saying that there were a lot of listener questions when we said we were going to start talking about this stuff on this show. So the Jim Birch is asking, so at DrupalCon, right? Dries talked about this in his Dries note. He said that there was a way to basically pledge that you wanted to help support Starshot. And Jim Birch is wondering when will people start hearing more about, those pledges and basically who's in charge of kind of that effort?
So Dries owns the submissions for that form, so he's managing that. Everyone will be contacted. We are planning to send out communications within a week from now, which means that by the time that this is published, people probably have already heard back.
Or very soon after.
Yes.
Yeah, very soon after.
So,
Very cool.
So Jim Birch, you should have an email from Dries in your inbox by the time you're listening to this episode. No, I'm kidding.
I think it'll come from the Drupal Association.
That's probably a better path forward.
Okay, so we also had a question from Brooke Heaton. He wanted to know, will Experience Builder be compatible with the current layout builder system? So there'll be a seamless transition for sites that do use the layout builder to start using Experience Builder.
We're aiming to make the experience of moving from layout builder or paragraphs to Experience Builder as seamless as possible. So I would imagine that for a site that is using vanilla layout builder, meaning without any contributed modules, it should be a seamless experience to move to Experience Builder. However, many sites are relying on a number of contributed modules to extend layout builder, which could add its own challenges to that seamless experience. So we have to define which number of contributed modules we can actually support for that, and sort of what is the impact, what is the complexity involved with different contributed modules, and then we will know more. That's what I kind of want to say. We will know more about the specific contributed modules as we get more visibility to what it actually means to build those migrations.
Is it something that you're thinking about as far as like either a migration path or some sort of module that allows you to like move from one to the other, or from layout builder, I guess, to Experience Builder?
I would imagine, and this is again speculation because we haven't done all of the in-depth research on this, but what we've been discussing so far is that it could be that the content editor decides on a piece of content that I want to move this content from layout builder into Experience Builder. They can see immediately how it would look like in Experience Builder, and they can make a decision on whether they want to continue on that migration for that piece of content or not, based on what they see on the preview.
Yeah, and I would think in this particular case, this is one of those things where the emphasis is on new sites, right?
Well,
but is that not true?
Well, I'm gonna. So yeah, I have some things to say about not how we'll do it, but what our guiding principles are. So we did a lot of going around and talking to people, like at events, partners, agencies, end users, and something that I heard really clearly is people were like, "We want this to work with our site as it is right now. Like, we do not want to build a new site to make this work. We do not want a big, painful migration." And part of the reason that Lowry said paragraphs is because we took that feedback and said, all right, well, let's look at what most people are using. And there's a couple 100,000 sites using paragraphs. And we don't ever want to repeat what happened to the community with Drupal 8, where we had to rebuild sites, where we had to rebuild the ecosystem. Like, however we do it, we have an explicit goal to not make this painful for people, to make it so that if they already have a site with a different solution, there is a path for them. So it's not just emphasis on new sites. Like, yes, it'll be simpler if you just have a new site and you don't even have to think about it. Will the migration be like a zero effort thing? Like, mileage may vary, I guess, like as Lara was saying, like, we don't know what you're doing. But it's a goal to make it easy with existing sites.
I can give some specific examples on what I'm imagining to be easy and what could be challenging. So, for example, if you have a custom block that you've created within Layout Builder and you've placed that in layout with some field blocks, that's something that we can move into the Experience Builder without any trouble. But let's add something like the Layout Builder styles module to that mix, and you've added custom styles to those blocks using that module. It could be challenging for us to do one-to-one mapping of the styles that you've added using the Layout Builder styles within Experience Builder. We could still move the content without any trouble to Experience Builder, but you might lose some of the styles that you had built in Layout Builder.
Okay. Before we move on, one thing that came up for me: when did the planning for these initiatives start? Because it sounds like I mean, I kind of knew that Dries didn't kind of just pull it out a week before DrupalCon. But if you've been interviewing people for a while, when did the impetus start for thinking about Starshot?
6 months ago, 7 months ago.
Okay.
Although at that point we didn't know it was called Starshot. We didn't know what it would be. Yep. We didn't know that Experience Builder would be part. That was like when we started asking the questions and thinking, okay, we need to do something drastic. Like we need to change the course of things for the better. Let's go figure out what it should be.
Okay.
And there was a discovery phase before that where we identified some of the challenges, which started after DrupalCon Pittsburgh last year. So we did some interviews on site at Pittsburgh where we got a hint of, a lot of the things that we're talking about today. We did some initial discovery, whether that is represented by the broader community. So we talked to a lot of agency and end users of Drupal. And then 6 months ago, we started to plan on what kind of solutions can be built.
But in a way, there were no surprises. And it's actually not a drastic deviation. It's actually exactly what the strategy has been. It's just a much more kind of urgent, directed effort to say, let's put our foot down and say what we're going to build by when, and make sure that we have a very clear idea of who it's for and what they're getting out of it.
Yeah, I think you said it earlier, right? It's like a culmination of that DrupalCon a couple of years ago, where we're like, hey, we're going to set out on this path. We're ambitious site builders, and now we're kind of seeing all of those pieces coming together into this new thing. I want to dig in on something that feels super complicated to me, and if the answer is I don't know, that's okay. Laurie, with the Experience Builder, you just mentioned that you'll be able to theme stuff within Experience Builder. What does that look like as far as Drupal being able to kind of support styles and allow people to style things well, right?
So in the beginning, that's probably going to be an experience where you can edit just code through the UI. That's probably what we start with in the first place.
But not PHP. Not PHP.
Not PHP.
Template code.
So Twig, CSS, maybe JavaScript. So essentially your SDC components, you edit through the browser. And we can build a more well thought out user journey for someone who can write template and CSS code. And that's an improvement on its own. Then the next step is to make that a more visual experience where you can actually, start tackling some of those things in a visual sense. And we can start with things like a visual UI builder for creating your SDC props. So you can define the content model or the schema of your component through the UI. Then you can move on to more visual things like a visual CSS builder for it. And then maybe you can even toggle between the code and the CSS, the visual CSS editor, so that if the visual CSS editor doesn't actually support what you are aiming to build, you can just go back to code and build what you want by using CSS. And that way, we don't necessarily if we start that way, if we start by code first, we don't necessarily have to worry about all of the complexity in the beginning of being able to build these super ambitious experiences using no code interfaces, because you ultimately can do everything that you can do with CSS and Twig today through that UI. And then you move one by one things to that no code UI.
So I have two follow-up questions. One of them I think will be quick, and this is probably not a huge priority, but as a developer, one minor pain point that I think happens on a fair number of my client sites is I find that there's one thing I need to tweak in the admin theme to just make it a better experience. And it feels significantly more complex than it should be, but it feels like if we're providing a way through, I'm going to call it core, even though it's technically not core yet, through a core approved method, maybe, of injecting styles, the ability to just have usually it's just 20 lines of CSS I need to add to an admin theme. And no admin themes really truly support sub-theming. It also feels like overkill to have a sub-theme just to inject 20 lines of code. Yes, you could use a module, but that also feels like overkill. Is there going to be a way to just provide like a little tweak to the admin theme if you need to?
I mean, I think if it means it's injecting CSS, I don't see anything bad with that. It would have to come with the expectation that, you know, the CSS that you provide there might break at some point of time. But, you know, it's just a tool where you can hack in some CSS. And I totally empathize with that use case because of I recently built a website to my mom and I ran into that exact use case. And I was like, I need to make some minor tweaks to the UI. I would like to just add, like, I think it was literally like 6 lines of CSS, including the selector. And I was like, how can I make this happen without writing a whole theme for it? And it was a massive pain to deal with.
Yes.
Sorry, I just got kind of excited there because for my own personal site, I've been struggling with that for a while now, and it's caused me not to even like think about like retheming my site because I'm just like, I don't want to get into it and have to build my own theme for this. Like, I just want to use core. So,
So this is a really interesting example because it's a great example of how it's not the right engineering solution. Like from a purity standpoint, like there's a right way to put CSS and ship it and aggregate it and make sure that it's super optimized and it's under version control. But everybody on this call would just like to just put a few lines of CSS in. And I think often with Drupal, in the past, when we've seen those competing things, like, well, the user really wants this and it'll make their life so much easier, but the right way to do it is over here. And when right means like code purity, and we go with code purity.
Yeah.
And I think part of Starshot is saying, well, you know, maybe we should just rebalance a little bit and index a little more towards what would make all of our lives better. And I remember, Laurie, when you told me about when you first started using Drupal, you were like, I installed CSS injector and it was magical. Like, you know, the truth is, like, it's a better experience and it does make a difference.
Wait
you might
a
just
second.
give up.
What's this CSS injector you speak of?
That was a great Drupal 7 module. Is it still around? I don't know.
I think it's a Drupal 6, Drupal 7 module. And it was one of the reasons I fell in love with Drupal because of I could inject CSS through the UI really easily. And I was a front-end developer before that. So Drupal was kind of overwhelming. And the CSS injector just made it so much easier for me to do things than what it was with other CMSs back then.
I was kind of hoping that functionality would actually have been included in the latest changes to Olivero, because like once Olivero allowed for you to like set colors, I was like, oh, this is great. Like I could just use this. And then I'm like, but I just want to change that one thing. And I was like, like, there's no easy way to do this.
So this is also where you just have to take a look at the competitive view too. Look at all the other CMSs out there. Mm-hmm. You can do this. And like in reality, if some site builder or content creator tries to use Drupal and they're like, I can't make this red, you know, like, and I just hit my head against the wall for 3 hours. I'm just going to go use Squarespace, Wix, Shopify, WordPress, even the, you know, Sitecore or Optimizer, like anything lets you do this. So you also just have to say, even if it's not a perfect solution, like it's valuable and everyone, like people will just go to a competitor to get it if we don't give it to them.
So the CSS injector example is a good one because of some people would probably say that maybe it breaks with your CDN or there's whatever thing that breaks when you use CSS injector, because there used to be plenty of developers who told me not to use CSS injector. So what we're changing in the philosophy is that we appreciate the need for that person to need a mechanism or have a need to have a mechanism through the UI to edit their CSS. And we're saying that we appreciate that enough to figure out a way to send that CSS to the CDN so that they don't have to deal with that problem in the first place. So instead of telling them to do it the right way in code, we figure out a way, how can we make it easier and support the way that they would ideally update their CSS.
And like, Nick, I know you want to go to the next question. Hold on. I'm just going to put a bow on that, which is like, something special about Drupal that not everyone else does is our fine-grained access control. So if you're running a site and you really don't want your content creators to mess up the CSS delivered by the CDN, unlike those other things, you could just use your access control to say, you can't edit this field with this particular role. And so we're taking away nothing from what people have today. And we can actually better control for people running amok than our competitors can.
Makes sense. And I want to make this next, I'd like to keep this next question a little brief because I want to get back to some of our listener questions. But I just want to make sure that Experience Builder, as you're looking through things, you're considering kind of things like Mercury Editor and Same Page Preview, because I think we had a show on Mercury Editor recently. I have a couple clients I think that are considering using it and a couple that aren't for certain reasons. But there are some pieces of Mercury Editor, like mainly just having kind of the content be in the main theme is really powerful. And that kind of thing, I think, would really make the experience in Drupal stand out. But like I said, I don't want to go down this particular path too far, but I just want to make sure it's on your radar. That's something that you're considering.
I think Mercury Editor is one of the best user experiences you can get with the different page building solutions out today with Drupal. Mercury Editor and Layout Builder then for site builders to actually manage the content type templates is a great combination. The challenge is that the building blocks don't integrate well together because you can't use your paragraphs building blocks within the Layout Builder. But that is a setup that quite a few folks have come up with and are using today. And not always, it could be also layout paragraphs and Layout Builder.
Yeah.
But
I think those are fantastic. I mean, there's a couple of other technical issues that are ran into the Mercury Editor using native web components and single directory components, but I'm sure those would get resolved. But yeah, I just want to make sure you're aware of those because I think they're a great starting point.
As somebody who uses Layout Builder very heavily for a very, very large project, I'm always very interested in the future of Layout Builder. So, and, I think the same could be said for people in the paragraphs camp, right? So it'll be interesting to see how those things progress. Matthew, just a few minutes ago now, I guess, you mentioned some of those other site building tools that people use that make it super easy for people to be able to create websites. Wix, Squarespace, WordPress to an extent. Matthew Scarset was asking if Starshot is trying to compete with those solutions.
I think it's a good question. I wonder if you ask the question, who does Drupal compete with now? What the answer would be. And, is it going to be any different? I think if I had to pick a competitor, it would be WordPress is the closest because it's something that's distributed as open source software, but also can, they have a SaaS version and you can also do it on a platform as a service model. There's not a lot of things that fit very well like apples to apples, but that one's pretty close. But I would say that Experience Builder and Starshot, they're competing with everything and that you can't win against anyone without this. This is table stakes. Whether you pick Wix, Squarespace, Shopify, WordPress, Optimizely, Sitecore, whatever, you're going to need these capabilities. These
even the headless
table stakes.
Players have this nowadays.
So I don't think it's changing who we compete against, but I do think it makes us more competitive against everybody.
I mean, you look at, every marketer on the face of the earth, right, is time to market, right? How fast can we get a website to the masses, right? And right now it feels like, and you guys can tell me I'm wrong, but right now it feels like Drupal takes a little bit of time to get to market in most cases, right? Unless you've put a lot of time and energy and dollars into building a solution that reduces that time, right? Where a lot of other solutions, that's not the case. And I feel like this is an answer to that problem, right? Hey, it doesn't do, it might not do extensively or specifically what if you have a very specific use case, what you need it to do, but it's going to, in a lot of cases, we'll say 95% of them, get you where you need to be very quickly, right? And I think that's important. I think that's something that we've kind of been lacking.
I think you mentioned something really good about it being, like the marketer trying to get to market and how expensive it is. Like, I think for the biggest customers, it can be millions of dollars to get a reusable Drupal application that has a good marketer experience. And, like a decade ago, closer to when Acquia started, I guess I'm saying that because I've been here for about 10 years. There was a different buyer for a Drupal application. It would be like the CTO or the CIO or some technical person in IT would be evaluating technology and choosing it to deploy websites for the rest of the organization. And they would use Drupal did really well because it has technical capabilities, and because all the other sites took just as long, or all the other frameworks. But today, that's really changed a lot. I think that like the CMO, the chief marketing officer, and increasingly people that are not in IT make the decision about what vendor or framework their whole organization will go with. And when they look at Drupal, they see the flaw that you're pointing out, John, which is my marketers can't get to market quickly. And I don't understand why it's more valuable than anything else. Because we don't, I mean, it's become clear to me, even just like talking with other people, with colleagues, like we don't articulate the unique value of Drupal well. And it can be hard to find the right words. And we've kind of, I think, landed on this idea of, leveraging Drupal's strengths with structured content and access control so that you have data consistency, so that you can do things like migration, rebranding, reuse of content across channels and contexts. That's what's unique about it. But that CMO doesn't hear that today. No one's selling Drupal saying this is what's special about it. And I know we have this whole marketing team now, working with the Drupal Association. So hopefully with them, like we'll arrive at doing that better. But this is part of why Drupal is receding. I think like the person who buys the solution is different. They value different things, and they aren't things that Drupal does necessarily well, and we don't communicate what it does well to that persona.
So Andy Bloom had a question that I think is a good segue from your answer, and that is the Dries note didn't explicitly state this, but Starshot feels like a way to kind of compete with the ease of starting a new WordPress site.
Yeah.
Do you think the DA or other Drupal hosting companies like Acquia, Pantheon, Platform, SH, do you think they have plans to offer a low-cost hosting plan that you can kind of spin up like WordPress.com or Drupal Gardens used to be with Starshot?
I don't know if I would say low cost necessarily. Like, depends on the company, whether you want low cost or high cost things, what you're offering, but there should be a low effort way for sure. And if I was a hosting provider, any hosting provider, I think I would try to do that. I also think that, Dries showed the mock-up on Drupal.org of like, the Starshot thing, which is a Drupal CMS tentatively, not the official name, and Drupal core or framework on the other side. And the buttons, the call to actions were not download, they were launch. And when you look at that, you have to ask, well, launch where? Launch. And that question is not answered, but I think it's critical that there is a button that says launch and that it doesn't require a download and composer install and local database setup. We have to solve that problem. I've heard, I don't know if this is a good idea or if we're doing it, but people have talked about using like WebAssembly to install in the browser. So like the browser's memory is what is used to trial Drupal. So it's not actually hosted anywhere. Cool idea. I don't know if if that's a good idea.
Simply test me too might be a good.
Yeah, but we got to figure it out. I do think we do have to figure that out. That's critical.
Feel like
I saw even a demo of a DDEV desktop application that you could install Drupal with without going to the command line.
Feel like
interesting.
feel like we need to, and this is not going to be a popular statement, so brace yourselves, but I feel like we need to take the developer centric lens off of it, right? Because for me, I saw that launch button and immediately in my head, I'm like, man, it'd be great if this could be like a Squarespace competitor, right? Where I can hit that launch button, get something, a version of Starshot somewhere. I don't care where it's hosted, right? Going back to, I think, Matthew, what you were saying earlier is like, people don't necessarily care what modules are installed or what's going on under the hood. They just care about like it working the way they need it to, right? I'm at, like, in my perfect world, like, I hit that launch button, I'm given an instance of Drupal somewhere, right? I can configure it, I can do everything I want to do, and then maybe at the point of me adding a domain, or maybe at the point of me deciding to actualize that site in some way, right? Then I put in a credit card, I pay for it, and like now it's an actual live site, being run. That's like my grand vision. Anybody wants to reach out and chat more about that, feel free.
This is really hard. It's a really hard question of like, because Automatic owns WordPress and they can just do that. But we are a community where there are many options. And you're not going to just, it's not going to just launch on Acquia or Pantheon or Platform when you press that. That wouldn't really be fair in the business community. It wouldn't really be in the spirit of Drupal and open source. But at the same time, we need that launch pad to go somewhere. So, maybe like you said, Simply Test, me, Nick, maybe some Drupal association service where you have like the prototype that you're building out, and then you said, John, like when you go to add a domain, or you just say like, I'm ready to launch it now. And then there's a list of providers, like which one do you want to launch to? And you can choose. That's a model I've seen with like builder.io, where you're like, okay, where do I want to launch this front end application to? Well, I could go to Vercel, I could go to Netlify, I could go to, AWS directly. I don't know if this is feasible, but I like that feeling of where there's like a free, not really commercialized evaluation, and then the next step is to choose a vendor for the commercial option.
And I mean, I think the lens there has to be like, I'm a new user. I'm a average. I don't want to say average because that's not complimentary, right? But like, I'm a user, right? I do not want to have to like hit that button, get a site, and then when I go to host it, like download it and upload it or import it and export it, or like whatever, those technical terms are. I just want it to work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's one part of the philosophy for Starshot, is to think about the whole user journey from Drupal.org to actually having your site launched. And there's some parts of the journey that are really hard today, where we have to solve some hard problems to make that user journey seamless experience. Yeah. And that's why Dries was saying, as part of the keynote, that we are doing these things because we, want to accomplish this. And it might be hard to get there, but we do want to get there. So we need to solve those hard problems.
Sounds good. Before I ask the last listener question that we have for today's show, I just want to mention that we have a thread in the Starshot channel in Drupal and in the Talking Drupal channel where listeners posted these. So if you want to take a look through those and maybe address some of the additional questions that we synthesized, it might be helpful for the community too. But Ryan Sharma asks, who does this initiative serve amongst our current business community? And what's the sales prospect in a world where most people are experiencing Drupal through Starshot for the first time?
I mean, I think there's this theme of like, this is all additive. So we lose nothing. And the current pitches and selling points business community that we currently use Drupal, they lose nothing. But we gain a lot, I think. The sort of pitches, like, hey, but really high levels, like you get the ease of use, the time to market, and the polish of like a WordPress, but you get the scalability, the security, the ability to extend and customize and reuse that only Drupal can provide. And I think that message is going to resonate very easily with enterprises or mid-market who like actually have more than one site, because that's immediately when it becomes valuable. And with the Experience Builder, I think we can extend that from data consistency to design consistency and reuse. And that's a real pain point for the typical buyer, the CMO. Like, how do I get all my sites to look the same? And what about when I change the design of something? How do I roll that out? How do I translate it? How do I have, so these are things that actually Drupal can do very well, but it also opens up the bottom of the market some, because people can get a small site up and running more easily, and because they're more likely to try it and like it than before. I'll add one other thing, which is, I mentioned, I don't know if buried in this question somewhere is like, what about agencies? I kind of feel like that might be in there somewhere. And I can imagine at first glance seeing Starshot and maybe feeling like, oh, that's eroding some of my IP. But I don't think that's right. I think it's sort of letting you do even more valuable stuff on top. It's taking care of the table stakes for you, so you don't have to charge your customer to set up a page builder. Like, that's not what they should be paying you for. And you can use the fact that there are these private recipes, repositories, for instance, or that we're going to have design system integration to say, I'm an agency, I've got a design system I can deploy really quickly, already integrated with Experience Builder, and I've got these recipes. You want this capability? Like, here you go. Here's this content model with this view, with this access model, and we're just going to go a lot faster. I can still keep my kind of IP that only I can deliver, but now I have more tools and less grunt work to do up front. So I do think it's really so much better for everybody in the business community around Drupal. I don't see any losers here.
Yeah, Matthew, I have to agree with you on that, because as a solutions architect for a service integrator, and I imagine agencies feel the same way, right? If Starshot takes care of that easy stuff and we can be left to do those, more custom integrations, those more custom module builds to say, hey, we need to integrate with, X, Y, and Z internal systems, right? Like, that's really what developers want to be doing, right? They want to be solving the harder problems. They don't want to be doing the kind of easy stuff or the stuff that's already been figured out. So I mean, I think that there's, I don't want to put too many eggs in the Starshot basket, as it were, but like, I think it does provide an easy entry point for business, and then a way for business to understand that there's an ecosystem and a community that can help them grow that initial site in ways that maybe haven't even really been thought of yet.
The second question was also what's the sale in the world where most new users are using Starshot. I just wanted to add to that I would not see there to be radical change in that. I would imagine that the way that community members monetize their services is going to be the same. So it's going to be professional services, whether that's development or design or content creation, marketing, whatever. It's still going to be the same, or hosting. Some of it might lead into more specialization because if there's going to be less of that grunt work, but largely all of that will remain as it is today, because we are keeping the extensibility aspects of Drupal intact, what we have today.
Yeah, and I think it's a valid question, though, because we want to make sure we don't have the inverse problem that we had with the Drupal 8 upgrade. We don't want to cannibalize the developer experience and agency experience for the site builder. We just want to bring the site builder back up to where or actually most likely beyond where it used to be, right? We kind of, I feel like we kind of undercut the site builder experience in the Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 upgrade. And this feels like it's getting us back to being competitive.
There's a reason Backdrop happened. I just to say, it's people recognized it, and it did disenfranchise a lot of people, and we're trying to maybe build that bridge back that we burned down. Let's get it back in place.
So Jim had asked a question about the pledge to Starshot. And we kind of talked about getting involved a little bit there, but I'm wondering if we can, to close out the show, talk more about how people can get involved.
So we're going to have some opportunities in the next week or two coming up. So we're planning to organize some webinars/meetings where we are going to be presenting more details about Starshot, and we're going to also present some opportunities for people to get involved. So that's gonna start in a week or two from now, which should be not that far away from actually when this gets published.
Yeah. But to be more specific, go to drupal.org/starshot. If you haven't already filled out that pledge, do it. It's not going into a black hole. It's another pun for you, John. It is being captured, and it'll be part of a mailing list, and it will be you'll be invited more easily to these webinars. And the goal is to have, for a while, one of these every week, with trees or an initiative lead in it, and for those leads to show up to those meetings, not just to tell you about it, but to say, here's a proposed roadmap, here's a way you can get involved, here's the people that are involved so far. So there is not, webinar sounds like a thing where you're just being talked at. It's much more collaborative than that. I think there'll be a portion of bringing everyone up to speed, but it's intended to be like a launch pad per initiative.
We need to figure out what is the exact format of that, because if we don't know how many people are going to show up, we have more than 300 people who have signed up through the forum, which is why I'm saying it might be something like a webinar format, because if we have 300 people show up on a call, it can be very challenging to do.
No, you've got to take questions from all of them, Larry. I'm sorry. I already committed you to it.
Yes, we'll do that.
I can imagine that being a very productive phone call.
17-hour phone call.
Well, at DrupalCon, the BOFs for Experience Builder were so big. Dries was calling them super BOFs, and it was just like a massive circle of people with a few in the middle hurling questions, and there were 2 of them on different days, and still couldn't get through it all.
Well, Matthew and Lowry, thank you for joining us for the show. It's been a great experience, and I'm sure that we're going to have some follow-up shows in the next couple of months to keep people abreast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
And you can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD-promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron. All right, Matthew, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Grasmash on Drupal.org. GRASMASH on Drupal.org.
And Laurie, how about you?
Also Drupal.org, Laurie with 3 I's, or on Drupal Slack. Both are great.
Awesome. And John, how about you?
I want to pause for a second and just thank Matthew for joining us for the last 4 weeks. It's been great having you. Folks can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and they can find out more about EPAM at epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NSXVAN. And of course, Matthew, you're always welcome back if you have a topic to talk about.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
Thanks, everyone.